Will we have the complete report? Are you going to be selective as to what you give members of Congress?
You mean the unredacted report?
Mm-hmm.
No, the first pass at this is going to produce a report that makes these redactions based on these 4 categories. I don't intend this at this stage to send the full unredacted report to the committee.
Welcome back. Just how far are Democrats willing to go to get the full unredacted Mueller report? The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee said today that anything less than everything is, quote, inadequate, and will go to court to get it. With me now is House Judiciary Committee member and Democrat from California, Karen Bass. Congresswoman, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Same here.
You heard from the Attorney General there that he obviously does not plan on showing any unredacted version to Congress, and I think he would argue that that isn't what the regulation says, et cetera. So what do you legally have at your disposal that makes you think you can make him do this?
Well, first of all, we'll look and see what he presents, but we certainly can issue a subpoena. As you recall, we voted last week to give the chairman the authority to issue a subpoena. And if they don't comply with the subpoena, then we'll take them to court. I know this was done years ago in previous administrations, and that might be what we have to do. If we have to do that, though, I think it'll be a sad day. But remember, this is the Attorney General who auditioned for the job with a 19-page report saying he pretty much is going to do exactly what he's doing.
Well, he clearly has an expansive view of executive power at a minimum. Right. Let me ask you this. The Watergate Special Prosecutor Philip LaCorvara and Lawrence Tribe, a Harvard law professor of some note, have an op-ed today arguing that if Barr is essentially being very aggressive with redactions due to the grand jury, due to using the 2 things that I think he would rely heaviest on to do redactions, the law governing grand jury secrecy, and then the law that has to do with if you're not charging somebody, you don't want to besmirch their character if they're not being charged. Now, they're arguing that if you start impeachment hearings, then you're entitled to all of this in the same way a prosecutor is, because this is suddenly a prosecutorial entity. Do you think you'll have to go all the way to opening an impeachment inquiry to force the Attorney General to share it all with you?
You know, I certainly hope we don't have to do that. I think that that would be very divisive. I think not only do we need the full report, but we also want all the underlying evidence. So we're asking for even more. And I think that it would be a shame if we had to resort to that. I know we have not discussed that so far, so hopefully it won't come to that. I will tell you, though, I'm very concerned for him to say that he's going to redact things that might besmirch a person's character. He could then give us, 100 pages of completely redacted, material, and that's just not going to be acceptable.
What does a compromise look like here? Are you open to where you get to look at it, but not keep a copy of it? It's held in a secure room. There's all sorts of ways. I remember the so-called torture report, which is what some called it. Others called it the enhanced interrogation investigation. There was some sensitivities there, and many members of Congress went and saw it themselves, but couldn't take notes and all of that. Is that a compromise that's worth thinking about here?
I don't believe it is at all. I mean, this is an investigation that taxpayers paid for, and not only should it be made available to members of Congress, I think it should be made publicly available. Now, I know that there might be some redactions that are needed, some classified information, and of course that's going to be acceptable. But I do believe the signals coming from Barr, though, are not very positive. So I would be very concerned about the way he is signaling now that it is going to be very heavily redacted. But you asked, what course we could take. I mean, perhaps we subpoena Mueller. It seems as though there's a number of people who were involved on Mueller's team that are very frustrated with the lack of information that Barr has put out. So it might mean that we subpoena some of those people. I won't be surprised if over time, if he really does do a complete, whitewash job, that more people involved in the investigation are going to start talking.
Now, in fairness, Congresswoman, we don't know anything yet, though. I mean, you're
Right.
assuming the worst here of the Attorney General. In fairness, why?
I am. I'm assuming the worst because I think he was pretty clear in his auditioning document how he viewed this whole thing. And remember, during the confirmation process, you remember he was asked to recuse himself. He didn't do that. He was also asked during the confirmation process, would he release the full report? And he was, pretty much saying that he would have to wait and see. So I think that given all the time that has been, all of the suspense, all of the taxpayers' resources, that there is an obligation for that report to be released in full.
I want to change subjects here on another congressional hearing today that you were involved in. And what's amazing is it turned out the way the hearing was watched proved the point. So during the hearing, YouTube was covering the hearing live. You had a Google representative testifying, having to do with how to deal with white nationalism, white supremacy, white supremacist hate, and this issue that Google, Facebook have had a hard time dealing with it. Google, because they own and operate YouTube. Well, there were so many hateful comments, YouTube had to basically shut down the comments section, basically proving they don't know how to deal with this.
Well, I mean, exactly. And I think that this was a very, very important hearing. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle wanted to use it for different purposes to show that, there was discrimination on the side of Democrats and all, and that really wasn't what the hearing was supposed to be about. We do have a problem in this country with domestic terrorism. We have a problem in this country with white supremacy. We also have a problem with, the way the social media is, the fact that all of those comments came in, and they literally had to shut the comment period down. I think it's an example of a problem.
Does Google at all believe that they should be held responsible for what is on YouTube?
Well, I think that they feel that they should be held responsible, but they also feel that they can police themselves. And so I think that the fact that they shut it down was them demonstrating that they have the capacity to monitor it themselves. But obviously, this is an issue we need to look at. We know the impact this had on the last election in 2016. Right. The fact that there were the hate messages trying to persuade African Americans not to vote, to take things very negatively. So we know that this is a serious problem.
Does it prove they could shut it down, or does it prove that they don't know how to filter it out? They don't have a filter that they claim they can use.
Right. Well, I think that that was pretty clear.
That's for sure. Congresswoman Karen Bass, good to see you, Democrat from California. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me on.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.